Welcome. I'm Dr. Lauren Stryker, and tonight I am doing the deep dive into cannabis, but specifically using cannabis to relieve menopause symptoms. And this is new for me. This is not something I learned about in medical school. It's not something I learned about in residency. It's not something I've learned about in all my years of practice. This is something I've learned about very, very recently, but it's not new in the world of medicine. And one of the things that I found as I was doing my own research is that cannabis has been used for menopause symptoms. I mean, we're way back in the 1800s, in the Merck manual, which was one of the primary medical textbooks of that time. They actually, on the one paragraph that they have talking about menopause, talk about the use of cannabis to relieve menopause symptoms. So it's been around, but I think now it's bigger than it ever has been before for a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, there's an acceptance of cannabis to be used not only recreationally but also appreciating the fact that it can be used for medical reasons. And let's face it, in spite of the fact that estrogen therapy is safe and it's effective, and I can talk and talk and talk and talk about it, but there are a lot of women who just say, I'm not going there. And in fact, right now, in the 60 million menopause women that are out there, 80% of which are having symptoms like hot flashes and vaginal dryness and all that, only about 7% of them actually even take or fill a prescription for estrogen. So women have and will continue to turn to other options, which is why I thought, okay, this is really, really important for me to understand this and to know about this so that I can talk about it with some knowledge behind it, and also advise my patients on what to do. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next few minutes, is talking about what is known, what is not known, because there is a lot of science. There hasn't been a lot of research. That's the problem, and there won't be for a variety of reasons, but there is good science. So before we get started with the questions, and if you do have questions, please put them in the comment box, because I want to get to all of them. But the science behind it is really interesting because, of course, we have our own personal endocannabinoid system. And one of the endocannabinoids in our own human system is actually in charge of temperature regulation, our own internal thermostat. And our endocannabinoids actually require estrogen to be metabolized. So there's a reason. There's a reason why not only when we are out of estrogen, when we go through menopause, that we start having all of these problems in terms of temperature regulation and hot flashes. But that also explains why cannabis actually can help with hot flashes. But like everything else, you have to know what you're doing with it, because all cannabis is not the same. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a survey and some research I'm doing, but I put it out there to ask women, what are you using? Is it helping? And it's really interesting because what I'm finding is that a lot of people are using it. In my survey so far, 70% of respondents say, yeah, I'm using cannabis to help with my hot flashes and insomnia. But then when I look at what they're using, specifically what they're using, a lot of them are not using what is going to help them the most. And that's not surprising because women are kind of being left to their own devices with this. One of the questions I ask is, who's advising you? Who's telling you what to do? And it's multiple choice, and they have a choice of the person from the dispensary or, a friend or a relative or a healthcare professional. And of course, the overwhelming majority of women are saying, no one is advising me. Erin, why won't studies happen? I'll tell you, it really, this question comes up a lot because people are like, why isn't it being studied? Well, if you look at what when studies do happen, it's when a drug has to get FDA approved. And if the drug doesn't get through the approval process, it's not going to come to market. And what a lot of people don't appreciate is that approval process takes an average of 10 to 15 years and costs millions and millions of dollars. So you have to have someone who's highly motivated to spend the money on those studies. And because cannabis is out there and people can get it, and you don't need a prescription, you don't need to go to a pharmacy, you don't need FDA approval, there's no one out there who's going to be highly motivated to do these studies. The other reason it's difficult to study, not impossible, but difficult, is because there's so many strains, there's so many different kinds. And when you do a study, you really have to get very, very specific, that we are looking at indica, or we're looking at edibles, or we're looking at hot flashes. So it's not easy to do these studies, and they cost a lot of money. So the survey I'm doing is really more to find out what people's experience is, what they're using, does their perception that they're helping them. And fortunately, I have some funding, not a lot of funding, but I do have some funding through Northwestern Foundation that are going to help me with this, because every time you do a study, someone's got to do the statistical analysis. So here's a question about, should women tell their doctors that they use cannabis? Would it then show up on the medical records? Well, one of the questions I asked in my survey is, did you tell your doctor? Did you tell your medical professional? And I'm getting pretty much as expected. Most people are saying no. Sometimes it's because they weren't asked. But right now, I've got about 20% across the board that were saying I was asked, but I lied. I didn't say that I did. And I'm really curious, because this will get divided up. I'm asking everyone what state they're from, because most of my respondents are from Illinois right now. But as we get into other areas, I suspect that that's going to be very different as we get into areas where it's legal, where it's acceptable as medicine, more in Colorado, California, all of that. But I think the real question is people are thinking that, first of all, there's going to be judgment against them. And I can't say that that's not true. I mean, certainly I'm not judging you. I think it's, normal, and I want to hear about it. But are there doctors that might judge you? Potentially. But there's nothing illegal about it. And if it goes on your medical record, you're not going to get your insurance canceled. Nothing bad is going to happen. And the truth is that you do want to tell your doctors, because there can be interaction with other medications, even with estrogen, and we talk about that a little bit. Anesthesia, blood thinners, all of these things could potentially interact with cannabis. So it is important that you tell your medical professional, and it is important that it goes on your chart. And there's such a stigma on cannabis. There is, but I really do think it's getting better. People like me, that's one of the reasons I'm trying to get out there, because I'm, as mainstream as they come. I'm academic, I'm evidence-based, I write in the medical literature, I talk at medical conferences. So this is actually one of the reasons why I have tried to get into this world, because I do have credibility. I do have credibility in the scientific and medical world, so that one of my goals is that there shouldn't be such a stigma, because it is medicine and it can help people, especially if they do it right. What's the best way to use cannabis to relieve menopause symptoms? This is from Janet. Well, it's like everything else when it comes to menopause symptoms. It depends on which symptom you're trying to relieve. And in my survey, I divided up into hot flashes, sleep, vaginal dryness, libido, and orgasm, because those are the big ones that women are using cannabis. And it turns out that you do need to use different products depending on which symptom you're trying to help with. But let me start with just kind of a general basic thing about using cannabis in menopause. And this is the very important point, that menopause women metabolize cannabis differently than premenopause women. They metabolize it much more slowly. And the reason is one of the first things I mentioned, is that in our endocannabinoid system, estrogen is a key component to metabolize cannabinoids. And if you're not making any estrogen, post-menopause, that means that your metabolism is going to be that much slower. So that is one of the challenges that we have in terms of telling women what to use and how to use it, because what we might tell 40-year-old to use in terms of helping her sleep is not what we're going to tell someone who's post-menopause. And the mantra that you'll hear me say again and again is start and go slow, because you can easily overdo it, and there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. But specifically, let's talk about hot flashes for a minute, because of course my book that's coming out, Hot Flash Hell, is how I got started in this whole thing anyway. And one of the things that is critically important when someone is specifically treating hot flashes is that the product that they use has THC in it. And THC we think of being as the hallucinogen part of cannabinoids, but in very small amounts, what we call microdosing. It is not going to make you high. It is not going to be anything other than going to kick into action your internal thermostat to alleviate those hot flashes. So in general, you want a product with THC combined with CBD, which is a hybrid. And then we get to how should you best take it? Should you smoke it? Should you, vape it? Should you eat it? What do you want to do? And it makes a big difference, not only in terms of how quickly it affects you, but in how it affects you. Now, it turns out that most postmenopause women go the edible route. No surprise. I mean, it's gummies are delicious, candy, chocolate candy, all this good stuff. But it's discreet. It's easy. Most menopause women, especially if they're flashing all day long, it's not like they want to start smoking pot at work or even at home and have the smell. Not to mention, it's really bad for your lungs. The good thing about smoking, of course, is that it's a very rapid onset of action within a couple of minutes, and that is something that is beneficial. But for all those reasons, you don't want to smoke, particularly because it can impact on your respiratory system. So I generally recommend if somebody's looking for that fast onset of action, they should use a sublingual product. This is something that goes underneath the tongue. Usually it's drops. Sometimes it can be something that can dissolve, because you're going to get a fairly fast onset of action, but you can do it very discreetly. The edible problem is edibles are metabolized really, really slowly. So if you eat, like half the brownie, and then an hour later you're thinking it's not working, and you eat the other half brownie, it might be 2 hours until you reach peak levels. And then suddenly you've had way too much. And I mentioned this the other day at the office. I was talking to one of my nurses who said, yeah, I tried it. I'm never going to do it again because I ate, 10 milligrams of THC in chocolate, which is like 4 times more than the menopausal women should be using. And she said, I slept for like the next 24 hours and I didn't feel right for 4 or 5 days. So if you are going to use an edible, you need to really be careful about the timing. Leave yourself plenty of leeway. If you're using it for sleep, and I'll talk about sleep in a second because we've been talking about flashes, but if you're using it for sleep, you really want to take about an hour before you want to drift off, and you want to just take a very, very small amount. One of the things that someone told me, I'm getting all kinds of great advice from people in this world, and one of the things that someone told me the other day is to kind of do a hybrid of the edible and the under the tongue, is if you take a chocolate that's cannabis infused and just kind of put the chocolate in your mouth and let it melt and let that go under your tongue, you will get the under the tongue absorption, but you'll also go in through your GI tract, so you kind of get the more immediate and the delayed. So, it's finding tricks with all of this. As far as sleep, in my survey, almost 100% of people said the reason they were using a cannabis product is to help them sleep. And interestingly, when I said, and how many of you is it helping? It was almost 100%. So the sleep thing is big, because we all know that menopause women, I just cannot get a decent night's sleep. And when you're looking at the different kinds, I mentioned THC for hot flashes. For sleep, you're really looking at an indica species of cannabis. That's going to keep, that's the one that's kind of known for keeping you calm and getting you into a relaxed state. And again, the hybrid, little indica, little THC is going to be your go-to as far as that, getting both covered, if you will, doing the sleep thing and also hot flashes. Let's talk a little about the sexual stuff, because I had some questions earlier on Facebook about the sexuality stuff, because so a lot of women will take cannabis for libido, and we don't have as great a science on that. I mentioned indica is what you're going to use for a good night's sleep. Sativa is the type of cannabis which is basically associated with being a little bit more stimulating, maybe feeling a little more sexy. And the question that came in on Facebook is, okay, but if I use sativa to help with my libido, and it does seem to help, what's that going to do for my orgasm? Is that going to kill my orgasm? Is it going to help my orgasm? What's going to happen? And so it's really interesting, because libido, forget cannabis for a minute. Whenever we talk about libido and postmenopause women and treating it, libido is really complex because it's so multifactorial. I mean, aside from, relationship and stress and sleep, and do you still like your partner and past experience and all of that, you're also dealing with hormones and neurotransmitters. So then when you put the endocannabinoid system into the mix, it does get somewhat complicated in terms of how much it's going to help your libido. But this is the thing that's interesting, is when we look at libido compared to something helping orgasm, it is an absolute given that anything that's going to help your libido is also going to help orgasm, because a lot of orgasm has to do with being aroused. And while libido isn't the same thing as arousal, libido is, I'm thinking about sex, I want to have sex, I'm going to have sex, as opposed to arousal, which means you actually are sexually stimulated. But it all goes together. It's not like these things are in each in their own little compartment or in a vacuum. So the answer is yes, in general, if anything you do that helps your libido is also going to help with orgasm. But the one thing I did mention when I was talking about how people use cannabis, whether they smoke it or vape it or put it under their tongue or eat it, there's the topical application. And when people think about topical applications, they're mostly thinking about, applying CBD salve to, their joints or aching muscles. And all of that has been shown to work because of the anti-inflammatory component of CBD that everyone's familiar with. But it turns out that there is some science to show that applying a CBD oil directly to the clitoris is going to help with the ability to have an orgasm. And it makes sense, because when you look at what it takes to have an orgasm, we know that the number one thing is good blood flow. There's these teeny, tiny little capillaries in the clitoris that need to feed the nerve endings to make them sensitive. And one of the things that happens post-menopause, not just because of lack of estrogen, but also because of age, or maybe diabetes, or maybe cardiovascular problems, is that the blood vessels in the clitoris, they're not the same as when someone was 20 or 30. So anything we can do to get more blood flow is going to be a good thing. And that's something that CBD does. CBD is a vasodilator. It increases blood flow to the clitoris, which in turn can help with having an orgasm. And it doesn't hurt that you rub it in. And the longer you put it in, the better. There is that part of it. But but it is really more of a topical thing, in addition to perhaps also enhancing lubrication for the same reasons. Anytime that you are going to enhance blood flow and have some vasodilation, you are going to increase the amount of lubrication that your vaginal tissue is able to make. So, it's just, you can go on and on. I could go on and on. I won't for too long. I'll stop. But, the point is that there is this huge world out there of potential benefits that we are just really now beginning to understand. I use topical for rheumatoid arthritis. Can the same salve be used for orgasms? You said organisms, but I know you meant orgasms, Tina. The answer is, in general, when we're looking at what we're putting on the clitoris, you want to put something that's not going to cause irritation. So it kind of depends on what the salve is in. There are specific oils as opposed to creams or ointments or lotions. And in general, you're better off with an oil with pure CBD in it, because otherwise the vulva is very sensitive. And a lot of women we see, and I run a clinic at Northwestern, a Center for Vulvar and Vaginal Health, and a lot of the women that we see that come in with vulvar problems, clitoral problems, it's because they're putting stuff on the vulva, which is irritating. So they do make specific CBD for orgasm. I think the company is called Fiora. They're not the only ones. I don't work for any of these companies. I don't get paid for any of these companies. But stick to the oils when it comes to clitoral application. Is CBD or THC better to help with menopause? This is from Cheryl. Thanks for the question, Cheryl. THC is better when it comes to hot flashes. CBD is better for local application for lubrication and orgasm. And it seems that a hybrid of CBD and THC, specifically indica as opposed to sativa, is best for sleep. Hot flashes combined, which usually go together. Most people that are flashing are the people that are also not sleeping. So generally, if you can get rid of the flashes, you'll be able to sleep as well. One other little hint that's really important for those of you who are starting to do this, and again, I know I said this before, but for the latecomers, I can't emphasize enough, start really, really low and go really slow. One of the things, if you're using these products to sleep, is First of all, you might wake up in the middle of the night with ridiculously dry mouth, drier than your vagina, and also just maybe a little bit unsteady on your feet. So have that glass of water at the bedside, and make sure that that if you are standing up to go to the bathroom or whatever, that you're feeling stable enough to do that. I mean, my Hot Flash Hell book is coming out in August, but I'm still in the process of making final edits. And the chapter that I keep editing is the cannabis chapter, because every time I turn around, I'm learning something new about cannabis, and specifically hot flashes. And the next book, this is a series, my Inside Information series, and I do have a number of books coming out. And the next book in the series is going to be about postmenopause orgasm. And yes, there will be a chapter on the specifics of using cannabis to enhance orgasm. And, where do you get this stuff? And that's another big issue is where can you go to buy it? And it is important what you get. And you do want to, most people end up going to a dispensary, and there are dispensaries in most states right now. Unfortunately, the person who works at the dispensary is not necessarily someone who's going to be all that helpful, because quite frankly, they might know a fair amount about cannabis, but you just mentioned the word menopause and you could just see, it's like, they have no idea. So again, you are a little bit on your own, which is why I'm trying to get the information out there. But you do want to make sure that you find a brand once you find something that works for you. And it's a good idea to keep a journal when you start doing this, so you know what's working, what's not, what amounts. And then once you find something that works for you, stick with it. Stick with the brand that you know that it's going to be pure, that they're going to, always have the same thing. It's tempting to get stuff from a friend or, wherever, but I really don't advise that.
I finally found a friend who understands the flashes and the feeling dry as sand. My body was on pause. It wasn't taking calls. Then Francie took me by the hand. She told me all these things that I can do, and why it is that sometimes I feel blue. She helped me see the light. Now I'm sleeping through the night. I find